out of the love of God, to guide and direct us along the way of abundant life, along the way of meaningful life, along the way of purposeful life. God's laws are given to us not as a burden, not to constrain our freedom. In fact, to increase our freedom, to enhance our freedom. Because freedom is not the same as license. If you look at the first reading of today, Moses explains to the people that when people get to know these laws that you have, the people will be jealous of you. When they come to know all these laws, they will exclaim, in this world, how can a people have such laws like this that guide them? Say, no other people is as wise and as prudent as this nation that has all these laws. So it's a source of pride for the nation of Israel to have these laws, and it should be a source of pride for us Christians to have the laws we have, because they make us different from people who are living only animal level. They teach us discipline. They give us the boundaries that we shouldn't cross if we are to remain alive and to live life abundantly. If there is a tall building like on top of this church, maybe there is a place to go and take a view of around, but it's very high, 30 meters high, and there is an instruction there that says don't jump. If there's an inscription there that says don't jump, it is restraining your freedom, isn't it? That the law in this church says don't jump. It's reducing, it looks like restraining your freedom. If you jump, the law of gravity will apply. No be so? If you jump, the law of gravity will apply, because gravity, if you throw something up and it comes down, then you break your head, you break your neck, you die. So when the law says don't jump, is the law reducing your freedom or actually enhancing your freedom to live? Now that's a positive way of looking at law. It is, that law is enhancing your freedom to live, to make the right choices, guide you to make the right choices that will make you live. Now, true freedom comes with some restrictions. And to be truly free, we must restrict ourselves. And that is the freedom that St. Paul talks about when he says in Galatians chapter 5 verse 1, it is for freedom that Christ set us free. Christ set us free that we may be truly free to live wholesome, abundant, meaningful, purposeful lives. God who created us with a purpose. And it is only when we follow the boundaries that he sets for us that we will fulfill that purpose. If we violate the boundaries he has set for us, we go outside the circle of his purpose, then we do not make a successful life. Because the designer wired us in a particular way and wants us to conduct our affairs in a particular way. When we deviate from that, then we deviate from the pattern, the design, and we don't live a successful life. There are natural laws, there are spiritual laws, and there are moral laws. A lot of the laws that guide physics, the law of gravity, for example, anything that goes up comes down. These are natural laws. There are all kinds of natural laws that if we violate, we suffer the consequences. If we violate the natural laws, we suffer the consequences. That's why, for example, they say, God forgives always. Man forgives sometimes, but nature never forgives. What it means is that if you violate natural law, nature pays back. Look at how we are insulting our environment, abusing our environment, and we are seeing the consequences. We are seeing the consequences every day when you violate. Just as we are facing the consequences, negative consequences, when we violate natural law, it is the same when we violate moral law or spiritual law. We will face the consequences. Because the laws are not there to punish us, to serve as a burden. They are there to guide you along the margin so that you will walk along the margin of the purpose that you have been created with. Now, there are these laws, and why should we obey them? We should obey them so that we may live wholesome, happy, and peaceful lives. Death, on the other hand, comes from disobeying them. if you look at those passages, when in Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, when God set the boundary and told Adam, you can deal with all the trees and things and fruits and so on in the garden, but the one in the middle of the garden, that one don't touch. If you touch it, you will die. And the human being decided to touch it. What happened? We are told death came into the world. Suffering came into the world. And the consequences are as pronounced in chapter 3, verse 1 to 24. The consequences of that sin. Deuteronomy says, Moses says in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 30, I set before you two ways. I give you life on the one hand, or death on the other hand. Life and prosperity, death and disaster. Choose life so that you may live. Moses pleads with his followers and pleads with us. There are two ways. Please choose life so that you may live. Same thing, Joshua chapter 24, verse 14 and 15. Joshua gathered the people and said, choose who you will serve. Is it the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob who created you and who has set you on the path of meaningful, purposeful, fulfilling, eternal life? Or do you want to serve the Baals, all those local shrines among you? If that's the one you want to choose. Then he said, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Then Matthew chapter 7, Jesus says there are two ways. There is the wide and spacious way, like the new road that will go from Abuja to the airport, wide and spacious. He said many take it, but it leads to death and perdition. And then he says there is the narrow and winding way. Only few take it, but that's the one that leads to life. So, if you agree to follow the narrow and winding way with all kinds of restrictions, it says narrow and winding, then that's the one that leads to life. Therefore, to be free to choose, we are free to choose the right way. You are also free to choose the way of death. You exercise your freedom, but then you face the consequences. Now, God's laws are given to us so that our hearts may be transformed. Please take note of that. God's laws are given to us to help transform our hearts, that we may live our lives totally in love of God and our neighbor. The laws are not just being there to be obeyed for the sake of the law. The law is not an end in itself. The law is meant to transform our hearts so that our hearts may become godly hearts. That's the purpose of God's law. God's law is there so that we may gain inheritance, the inheritance God has in store for us as his children. And that is what? Beatific vision, eternal life, heaven. That if we follow God's law, then, like I said, the purpose for which we are created, as St. Augustine says, you have created us for yourself, Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. You have created, that's the purpose for which we were created. Unless we are on our way to resting in God, our hearts will remain like wanderers, restless. God's laws are there to bring our hearts closer to him and to his people in love. The purpose of God's law is to help transform our hearts and make our hearts close to God and make our hearts godly hearts. It is not just the letter of the law. The letter of the law is a means to an end. The real end is the transformation of our hearts. The laws are not meant to be a burden, as I explained. Instead of being a burden, they are actually an expression of God's concern for us and God's presence in our midst, as that part of the first reading says. The people are to live by the commandments. They are not to die by the commandments. Keeping the commandments is to ensure that they live. It's like keeping the commandment of not jumping from the rooftop down. If you don't jump from the rooftop down, then you live. If you decide to jump, then you die. We live by them if their observance makes us love God and our neighbor better. When we talk about obeying the commandments of God, the laws of God, keeping all kinds of observances, the key question in today's reading is, does that practice, all your religious practices, does it make you closer to God? Love God more and your neighbor more? If it doesn't, then it's useless. Because there is no value, Jesus is teaching, there is no value in the law just as an end in itself. When there is a law, FRSC gives a law that you can only go 100 kilometers an hour on certain roads, It is not an end in itself. It is in order that it may ensure I can control my car better when there's any emergency, so that I don't kill myself and kill other people. When I obey it, I benefit by arriving where I am going, rather than if I am on 180 kilometers an hour. We die by the laws if while observing them there is no love in our hearts. Even when we are keeping the laws, if the most important purpose of the law, to love my neighbor, to love God, to love my neighbor, to be compassionate, to be forgiving, if that is not in my heart, I may obey all the laws, then I'm just a Pharisee. Because the goal, the purpose, the end is not being fulfilled. Now, in today's readings, gospel, the Pharisees challenged Jesus over his disciples violating the ritual purity law by not washing their hands before eating. So the Pharisees prided themselves. They were very good in keeping all those laws about, how, they had a measurement, how far between your fingers here, how far up must you wash your hand. They had laws about that. They had 633 laws. If you look at the book of Leviticus and count them, 633 regulations and laws. For example, when you kill a ram, what part of the waist you won't eat? I hope you know that there are such laws. The sciatic nerve, that one that God broke when he fought with Jacob, is not meant to be eaten by the Jews. And if you eat it, you die. So there are parts of the meat you can't eat. And of course, you know that pig, you can't eat that one at all. There are many animals you can't eat, and if you eat it, you have not only become impure physically, but you have become impure spiritually. So all kinds of laws that they had to obey. Now, Jesus Christ said, all this you are talking about, if you are doing all this and your hearts are far away from me, it is useless. And he quotes Isaiah. Isaiah had already observed that when Isaiah says in chapter 29 verse 13, these people honors me with lip service, but their hearts are far away from me. Observing all those things, refusing to eat the part of the ram they say you shouldn't eat, refusing to eat pig, fasting 2 times a week, paying your tithe, doing all those things. If you do not love your neighbor, if you refuse to forgive your neighbor who has hurt you, if you are not kind to the widow and the orphan, if you see people on the road who are scavenging, eating from dustbin, and your heart doesn't go out to them, or obeying all those laws is useless. That's rather shattering, isn't it? Somebody came to me. I preached this homily last night at the night mass, Saturday night mass, and somebody came to me and said, Father, what are you saying? I am really troubled. One of us here. He said, I'm really troubled. You mean all the masses I've been attending in the last 1 year, simply because there are those people that I had problem with and I don't want to deal with them. I have not forgiven them, but I don't want to have anything to do with them. Simply because of that, you mean all those masses are useless? I said, no be me to come. No be me to come. Now Jesus talk. I don't want to say they are useless. No mass is useless, but how much can you benefit from them? I said the only way by which those masses will be useful is when you come to those masses, if at least for 1 minute you say, Lord, help me so that someday I may know how to forgive these people. Do you understand? Then if you spare some little moment to pray for those people, for God to touch your heart to help you how to forgive them, then that mass is useful. But if you say, no, Lord, I don't want to deal with any of those people, those stupid people, but Lord, bless my business. Lord, bless my business. Bless my contract. Make my family prosper. Say the worship they worship me is worthless. Hey, the thing is serious. It's very serious. You mean, even Dr. Nyoko, if you help do harvest well and help us raise 50 million naira, if madam offend you, you know, forgive them. That all that your effort is, hey. That's what he's saying, isn't it? If you preach this message too much, you're not going to make much money in church. Jesus uses the occasion to teach a major lesson on what authentic religion consists in. 1, he says, external acts and ritual observances in religion can easily become an end in itself. Do you understand that? You see, external acts. People come to me, for example, and say, Father, these people are not genuflecting enough before the Blessed Sacrament. The person, I saw the person, he only bowed before the Blessed Sacrament. He didn't genuflect. And the person is really troubled about this. And he's not able to pray because he's worried about that person who didn't. People have come to me and said, Father, I go to the Blessed Sacrament and I see people lying down, prostrating. Father, this is not Catholic. Lying down, prostrating in the Blessed Sacrament. It should be, they just kneel, not prostrate. I say, please leave them now. If they want to lie down, let they lie down. But the person is really troubled and is engaging him and is unable to pray when he went there because somebody is lying down. Some people go to church, they want to use tape to measure the skirt of a girl, whether it is how long beyond the knee. And they are really troubled. The thing is paining them. That skirt does not go beyond the knee. This is immodest. There are places in this country where people have been beaten, actually physically beaten and seriously assaulted for the dress they wear to church. Do you know that? Now, has that not begun to go to violate the real thing? If you do that in church when you have come to worship, do you recognize you have begun to go beyond? You are violating the real reason. I told a story here some time ago and I repeat it. Sometime 4 or 5 years ago I was in Lagos and I normally at 6 a.m. I normally go jogging. And I was jogging, and as I was jogging I was passing by one culvert, and a car which I had seen and I thought he had seen me, a car was coming and I was on the pedestrian part and I was just crossing. The next moment is that the car came literally about to lift me up, to knock me down on that culvert part because he was going to park. And I turned to him and I said, you want to kill me? And the person said, please don't spoil my Sunday. I am a priest. On Sunday morning, 6 a.m., somebody is telling me, please don't spoil my Sunday. When he said that, I quickly walked away before he recognizes that I am a priest. I was totally disarmed immediately, and I quickly walked away and turned like this to make sure that he doesn't recognize I'm a priest. Well, it is true that he did something terrible. He drove badly and almost knocked me down. But the way I responded, don't you know? The person said, please don't spoil my Sunday. Myself, I learned a powerful lesson that day. What is in the heart, how I respond to somebody that provokes me, is more important than all the 3 masses I was going to say that day. Do you get the point? How I respond to somebody on Sunday, a holy day that I am vowed to keep holy Sunday holy. How I respond to somebody, even somebody who provokes me, is more important than what? The 3 masses I say on that Sunday. Do you accept that? That's the point Jesus is making. Some time ago, somebody in this church wrote an article in the bulletin. She called it Salvation in the Car Park. And she was reflecting about how when people finish church and receive communion, how they fight in the car park outside. How they fight in the car park outside. See, have you not just gone to adore God, to honor God? Was your heart in it? If your heart is in it, was in it, then it should have transformed you. Or let me tell you another story. Somebody told me, a member of this church said that as she was coming to this church here, there's somebody a member of the church who began to harass her to come and be his girlfriend. I mean, real amorous talk. Then they parted, and then she was saying, what kind of thing is this as I'm going to church? And they entered church. By the time they finished mass, he looked for her again and said, hey, as I was saying before we entered church. You see that he's 2 hours in the church was nothing. The person could have come here and knelt down, and during Thanksgiving he will dance and do all kinds of things, but what was in the heart? What was really in the heart? It was this, how to continue this discussion after Mass. Authentic religion involves the cleansing of the heart. If you come here and do 10 hours, if you do 10 hours and your hearts are not clean, Dr. Onjoko, you hear that? You hear? So if you do 10 hours, if you go out only to continue where you stopped before the Mass, it's useless. You know, I have seen it. I've traveled and seen where Muslims are quarreling. Two Muslims are quarreling. As they are quarreling, they look at their time, it's 4 o'clock. Then they stop the quarrel, and then they pray, and then they resume. Now, all that show, they show that you have forgotten the real reason of the prayer, right? So the prayer becomes just fulfill an obligation. It's time for 4 o'clock prayer. You say the 4 o'clock prayer. But after the 4 o'clock prayer, you say, hey, as I was saying before the interruption of prayer. Whereas if it is real prayer, if you are quarreling and you didn't think of God, and you are reminded by 4 o'clock that God is there, then either you stop the prayer and reconcile with the person, or the prayer just knocks the problem off and you say, well, because of this prayer we have said, the thing is over. Right? If it is real from the heart. It is more about inner transformation. Religion is more about inner transformation than outward rituals. We love rituals, all of us. But religion is not so much about external rituals. Rituals are important, but it is more about the heart. Jesus did not object in principle to ritual observances. He himself did a number of ritual observances. When he was born, he was taken to the temple, right? And they did all the ritual things. They offered doves and offered all the things that need to be done for a son, a first son, was done for him. He himself every year went to Jerusalem on pilgrimage, right? Those are all rituals. He did everything that should be done. But he is teaching that these are not the issues. One, he says, for all the elaborate and rigorous ritual observances of the Pharisees, their hearts did not genuinely come close to God. They were not close to God. And it is when the heart is close to God that the person is really worshiping. And there are evidences to show that the heart is close to God. What are they? Love, mercy, compassion. If we don't see love in you, mercy in you, kindness in you, compassion in you, then you are not godly. No matter how many novenas you do. Christian religion, we said, is a religion of the heart. You need the heart to be merciful. The heart is engaged. If you are going to see somebody on the road and your heart will collapse, something will happen here, and then you stop to help the person. You need the heart to do that. But to go on pilgrimage to Jerusalem, you only need a bank account. You don't need the heart. Who objects to that? To go on pilgrimage to Jerusalem today, all you need is a bank account. Your heart may not be involved. In fact, many Nigerians, those of you who go to pilgrimage in Israel, you know, many Nigerians go for shopping, period. I've gone to Israel a number of times, and you go to certain big shops, especially the big one in Bethlehem, and once you arrive and they see that this is a contingent of Nigerians, hey, Nigeria, welcome, and everybody is running around. Reason is that Nigerians buy, they buy and buy and buy. And then if you lead any group of pilgrims to Israel, be sure there will be trouble over excess luggage. So all you need to go on pilgrimage is a bank account. But what you need to forgive somebody who has offended you is what? Is a heart. What you need for that widow in your village, that poor widow in your village who herself and her children have been suffering since 5 years since their husband died, in order for you to think of helping them, what you need is the heart. But you really don't need too much of the heart to do novena, you know. That will look shocking. for many of us, right? You don't need too much of the heart. You can go through all the motion of a novena. You can go through all the motion of attending benediction. You kneel, you bow, you can do all that. The heart may not be engaged. The heart may not be involved. But the heart must necessarily be involved if you need to forgive your wife or your husband that hurt you yesterday. If you wake up this morning, Sunday, and you decide to come to church, and you enter your car and drive to church, it may be a matter of habit, you know. Don't you think? What else would you do on Sunday morning if you don't go to church? So your heart may not be in it. But for you to forgive your wife that you had a major quarrel yesterday, for you to get up and go and greet her and say, good morning, I have forgiven you, let's move on. You need the heart to be involved. Are you getting my point? So there are many religious things that you can do without your heart being part of it. It's easy. Even the priest can go through the motion of the mass without his heart being there. Unfortunately, it can happen. The good thing though is that the church teaches us that even when he does that, the sacrament remains valid, because Christ still comes down if he calls the name. Thank God. But he can go through it. Like I said, I gave you an example of one Sunday morning when maybe one poor member of some little church reminded me not to spoil his Sunday. So if your heart is involved in the worship of God, as you wake up on Sunday morning and you say, I'm going to church, then the first thing you really think is there somebody that has hurt me that I have not forgiven? Because I've got to deal with this to approach my Lord. I've got to have a clean heart to approach my Lord. That's why Jesus Christ says, if you are bringing an offering to the Lord and you remember, maybe when you left your house with the yams, you didn't remember, but at the door you remember that there's somebody has hurt you. What did he say? Leave the offering there. Go back and be reconciled with the person before you come. Why? Because if under that circumstance you bring the offering, he says it is what? Worthless. Hey? If I preach this message too strong, harvest this year go hard. Happy? If I preach this message too strong, harvest go hard this year. Meaning that if you work very hard, where is Norbert? Okay, chairman of Harvest Committee this year is not here. If you work very hard to raise 50 million naira for this church, and you have this cousin in the village that you have refused to forgive, in spite of all that the thing is, hey, chairman, it's a difficult message, isn't it? But it is the message of Christ. It says that number 3 here, the Pharisees were putting all their energies in the wrong activity. They were too concerned about creating an impression of piety while neglecting the real task of reforming their inner motives and intentions. For Jesus, their hands might be clean, but that does not amount to much if interiorly, if they are driven by all kinds of unholy, selfish, evil, and wicked motives. What God truly wants, he says, from worshippers is to allow their inner intentions to be transformed through contact with God. Every time we are going to church, my brothers and sisters, it is to say, Lord, transform my heart today with the power of your word and your sacrament. Heal me today. Heal me of selfishness. Heal me of greed. Heal me of lust. Heal me of all that defile me, so that I may be acceptable before you, so that my prayers may be worthy of you. Everyone who goes to church, everyone who approaches God, every time you kneel, even in your house, to pray, the real issue is to constantly pray for a cleansing of your heart. Moses speaks about the circumcision of the heart. On daily basis, we should be praying that our hearts be circumcised. And we Christians call it conversion. Prophet Hosea, in Hosea 6:6, he says, what I want is mercy, not sacrifice. What I want is mercy, not sacrifice. God does not need our bulls and our goats and rams if we have not shown mercy, if we have not been compassionate, if we have not been kind, if we have not been forgiven, if we have not loved. I mean, I see, do you know that there are even Catholics who go to confession, and as they go to confession they say, Father, I'm trying, except that bitch that they put in my house as my wife. I mean, forget about her, but I am doing my best and doing all that. And I listen and I say, hey, what a saint you are, except that bitch. Because we have learned to compartmentalize our life. So this bad relationship I have with this person, you can put it in a pigeonhole and lock it and live a very vibrant religious life before your God. Just as in this country, we put our religious life, we do wonderful religion on Sunday, we lock it on Monday to Friday and do all the inflation of contracts. No be so? And all the corrupt practices, all the ones that EFCC and ICPC and Code of Conduct Bureau and all the all that they are engaged about. There are no Christians who do those things. There are. So what have they done? What they have done is that they have worshipped God very well on Sunday, and on Monday to Saturday they do business. They do business, and that business does not involve God. Do you see the point? And all that God is saying, Jesus is saying today, is that after doing all that Monday to Friday, he says that that worship on Sunday amounts to what? How much does it amount to? Nothing. Joel chapter 2 verse 13 says, let your hearts be broken, not your garments torn. You know, in those days they used to do penance, and when they are doing penance, we hear that reading a lot during Lent. When they are doing penance, people will tear their garments. We are told that in Nineveh, from the king to the animal, the king tore his garment, put ash cloths on, and did penance, right? Now, it is not the tearing of the garment Jesus is saying. It is not the wearing of the heart, of the ashes, but what? A broken heart, a real soft heart. A heart that is converted. Isaiah says God prefers that believers show love and compassion and practice truth, justice, and honesty in their business affairs than indulge in rigorous penance, scrupulous activities of rituals, and so on and so forth. Now, what is more important is that the heart be broken, and that you show you show compassion and mercy and forgiveness, and that you exercise truth and justice. That is you are honoring God more doing that than all these practices. Not that the practices are not important, but that the goal of the practices, the purpose of those practices, as we say, the purpose of the law is that we be close to God. So if you are doing those things perfectly and you are not close to God, then it is useless.